Please remain standing. I'm going to sing one stanza of Lift Every Voice and Sing. The words are on the back of your programs. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling seas. Sing a song full of the hope that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Faith in the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. You may be seated. Most worshipful Grand Master, honored guests, Grand Lodge officers, Grand Chapter officers, past and present, members of the Prince Hall family, sisters and brothers, good evening. I stand before you at this time to introduce and present to you our masters of ceremonies for the evening. The person I am speaking of is a past master of Christmas Alice Lodge number 60, past grand lecturer of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge, F&AM, a neighborhood activist, a gentleman, and my friend. He is married and the father of 4 children. I now present to you Right Worshipful Benjamin J. Brown, Jr., Brother Brown.
Thank you very much, worthy matron. Your sisters and brothers, Hotep, Baragati, Assalamu alaikum. Praise the Lord. As an African custom practiced by our ancestors, at this time, I'd ask you to join me in doing what is customary done, giving thanks and praises to our ancestors by pouring water, since we're not outside, but on the ground. And I'd ask those who are not familiar, when I pause, by saying Ashe, meaning so it is, or it is so. So, in honor of our ancestors, whose footsteps we follow, and upon whose shoulders we stand, at this time, we give honor and praises to them. To those who have gone before us who have made this possible for us to be here, our patron saint, Prince Hall, who came all the way from Barbados, who secured a charter legitimizing us, was referred to as African, which applies to everyone of African ancestry. To one who has contributed more than anyone that we could think of in this jurisdiction, who made it possible for us to assemble here, the most worshipful, Louis Fair Jr. Without Louis Fair Jr., we might have been homeless. So all praises to that honorable brother. Sure. Thank you. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to present to you, for the welcome address, the master of Crispus Attucks Lodge number 60, our worshipful brother, Stephen James Robinson. Worshipful master.
Dr. Ben. Good evening. We have a lot of information to give you this evening. I'm so glad that you could make it out. And without further ado, allow me to introduce Fred D. Parrish, the Grand Master of Grand Master of Prince Hall Masons.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I was a bit taken back at this short introduction. I was beginning to relax, and he said, Fred D. Parrish, so here I am. My function this evening is rather pleasurable in that my life has been spared to be able to introduce a noted lecturer, Dr. Joseph Ben-Jochannan, who was educated in Brazil, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. He received his doctorate in cultural anthropology in Cuba and a second doctorate in Moorish history in Spain, in addition to a law degree. He is also an architect. His vocations have been as varied as his academic experiences. For example, he practiced law and he was a civil engineer in Puerto Rico. His professorships include a tenure at the University Al-Azhar in Cairo, Egypt, and at my alma mater, Cornell University. He taught in universities in Africa, the Caribbean, North and South America. And above all, he is an expert on international affairs. Dr. Ben was the chief of the African desk of UNESCO. He was a civilian advisor to the Permanent African Mission in the United Nations. And despite his busy schedules, which includes teaching, lecturing, and research, he is also a fertile writer. He has authored more than 28 published books and more than 16 unpublished books. He has also compiled a multi-volume encyclopedia on Africa. And the next voice you will hear is that of the notable Dr. Yosef Ben Jochannan. Please stand.
Most worshipful Grand Master, your officers past and present, and hopefully those for the future. This evening's lecture is rather significant and gives me quite a lot of pleasure as well as displeasure having to give it. Why the pleasure is very understandable. Why the displeasure may be the problem. But the problem comes not from the persons receiving it, it comes from the manner in which they receive the information for what they have. I brought with me, as you see right here, two basic books. They are books from Egypt. When these books were written, there was no God by the name of Jehovah, no God by the name of Jesus, and no God by the name of Allah. Yet African people were here in this world. And I'm going to speak on data going back before Adam and Eve. There were no Adam and no Eve, from whence I'm going to speak, and the world was here. There was no book of Genesis because the Hebrews gave us what is called the 5 books of Moses. And the first Hebrew was a man called Abraham. Abraham was born in the city of Ur in Chaldea. It is spelled U-R, Ur, and Chaldea is spelled C-H-A-L-D-E-A. He was born around 1700, before the Common Era, as you may say, before Christ. That means that his mother was here. I said he was born from a woman and a man, meaning both parents preceded him, and their parents and ancestors before them preceded him. He was born after there were already a nation and many other nations that were neighbors to that nation, and there was no state by the name of Israel yet. So I give just slight background to start so that you have no problem in understanding that Solomon wasn't born yet. It would be, Abraham was born, according to them, around the 14th dynasty. That's us, the African. We had dynasties all along the Nile. I don't know of an Asian dynasty nor of the European dynasty, but I can assure you there were African dynasties. Thus, if we had dynasties, we had pharaohs. As a matter of fact, we had the first one. And we had them until the Asians came while we were in our 14th dynasty. The first group of Asians to come to conquer any part in the continent we call today Africa. We had dynasties. In and around the first dynasty, we were still without an organization we today call Masonic, by whatever reason or meaning. And in the third dynasty, however, we started an organization to continue the building of structures in Egypt. And may I remind you that Egypt is the last nation built along the Nile, not the first, as some of us speak. The first nation built along the Nile started in Central East Africa. Today we call it Uganda. It was part of the Bokonga Kingdom. And I'm going back rather far because I'm going before the first dynasty, meaning I'm going before 4,100 years before the Christian era. Solomon, on the other hand, doesn't come in before 1000 BC, and that would be around the time when Greece came into existence. That means the first European nation. I hope you will take note of that fact. The first European nation in history is Greece and Rome. That is providing you want to accept that a wolf named Remus raised two people, and those people created a state. I mean, if all those kind of things we accept in the Harvard and places like that, and it's okay. But when I speak anything serious, it's difficult because they come from Africa. Now, these positions I'm laying down so that we have no difficulty when I start to deal more directly in what we call the Masonic literature. It would seem to me that the history states that the first literary person in all of Europe, the first one to have written anything for publication so that others can read it, would be a Greek. And that Greek would write two pieces of literature, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The first two books written any place in Europe. And the nation was called Greece, and the author was Homer. There is, I will put my life on it, no other work written in Europe prior to that, to those two books, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And Homer said in the Odyssey, even the gods that Greece adopted came from Ethiopia. And there's no Ethiopia anyway in the continent of Europe. No Asia. There's one in Africa, East Africa to be exact. I know I was born there. Now, that as it is, we need to move a little, but I just thought that it was necessary to establish this point. So we got two most important things in what I'm going to speak about tonight. I am not speaking tonight when I mention the name Solomon and the Masonic lodges or anything dealing with Masons, dealing with Asia or Africa or vice versa. I am dealing with Solomon as spoken about by England, not by Asia or by Africa. Let me make it clearer. A part of an island related to Europe, otherwise in ancient time called Anglo-land, which is today called England, with a combination of Ireland and Scotland. This land took upon itself, after finding some documents in Egypt, a part of Africa, Northeast Africa, did translate those documents for the purpose of their own. And out of that, using with what was developed as the Holy Grail in an attempt to conquer part of Asia and part of Northeast Africa, in that they continued on, adopted certain teachings, and did call that today what we know as the Masonic principles. Those principles were attributed to a condition dealing with one of the head of the Hebrew government, one man by the name of Solomon. The same Solomon, it is said, that had a relationship with the great queen of Ethiopia by the name of Makeda, which you commonly speak of here as the Queen of Sheba. But may I remind you, Sheba is in Asia. She was the queen of Aksum, because what is called today Ethiopia was then called Aksum. Ethiopia is a name given us by the Greeks, not by ourselves, as we have had many other names. So she was the queen of Aksum, but the empress of Saba. Let me make it clear again. When a queen has a land, she's the head of that land. When that land under her captures another king or another country, another land, she then becomes empress of the land she captured. And that's I need that qualification because it becomes very important in my discussions. There we have now, for the sake of time, we must make some things very clearly. Why did we need any kind of organization, whether it be from one or the next? Number one, something had transpired in what is today called Egypt, from the Greek Egypticus and the English Egypt, the Africans Tameri, and other people have different names they call Egypt, especially the Jewish Mizraim and so forth. But what had transpired is that in the third dynasty, a revolution took place, and the revolution was something that has put the world on fire ever since: the building of stone structures. In the third dynasty, under the pharaoh Djoser, D-J-O-S-E-R, otherwise called Sir, S-E-R, which the Greeks could not pronounce, and they called Djoser, D-Z-O-R. A man, this man, a multi-genius, a man of many, many talents, by the name of Imhotep. Most of us knew him first as a physician. And we said that he was the first physician, when in fact we have still found out that his mother was a physician and his two sisters were physicians, and many other people before him were physicians. But nevertheless, that would be enough for the point. Imhotep didn't want his pharaoh to be buried as other pharaohs before him, because the place in which they were buried soon rotted, and there was no proper way in which you could protect what was left. Thus, he pondered consistently for a place to bury the pharaoh and the method in which to, and finally came up with the use of stone, masonry. And that is where the aspect of the word masonry is going to start. Imhotep died in the third dynasty around 2785 before the Common Era. Solomon was born not before 1000 BC. So Imhotep was over 1,200 years older than Solomon. And he's going to introduce what we today call Freemasonry. 1,200 years before Solomon. So if Solomon is the father of Freemasonry, what would you call Imhotep? The grandmother? No, but I understand. I understand because the European told us. And if they told us, it got to be right. Irrespective of the data that we deal with. Let us continue. So Imhotep designed a pyramid, but he did not start out to design the pyramid, but to design a bench, a box, a mastaba. Mastaba is an Arabic word. The Arabs weren't there yet, by the way. I'm just using the term that is used. The Arabs are going to come way, way later. There's no Arabs in the world yet. The word don't exist. Imhotep continued and built one mastaba, two mastaba, and three, 7 of them, each smaller than the other. It looks like a wedding cake. Today, the step pyramid at Saqqara is still there to the present time, that you can go anytime to Egypt and see, as so many other of the 91 pyramids, covering over an area of 10 miles square. So it is that particular pyramid that we are interested at this particular point. May I remind you, there is no God at this time by the name of Jehovah. None named Jesus and none named Allah. I must remind you, because it's very important, that your ancestors worship different gods and goddesses, none by that name. They are not going to do that until they are in the 14th dynasty, when the Hebrew would come to us, Abraham, or Ibrahim, as you may say, would come and then introduce his concept of a deity. When we go back to the book of Genesis, after worshiping the goddess Hathor, or Het-Heru, the goddess that looks like a cow with woman's ears, goddess Het-Heru. You recall that when Abraham is having to make the sacrifice with his son, offer to make the sacrifice with his son, and that was the goddess, the cow goddess that they showed then. It was the cow goddess that the Ethiopians, the Nubians, and the Egyptians carried with them when they went all the way to India, struggling. When they conquered the city where Abraham was born, they conquered that city and changed the name from Chaldea to Punt. It is at that time, however, that Imhotep gathered around him the men who worked on the pyramids of Saqqara, and given each of them respective name based upon the jobs in which they did. They were the master mason, and I would, in some of these cases, my brothers, I will not define the relationship of certain titles to a certain job, because you will understand why I am not doing it. Because at this moment we will not speak on each other on what level or the other level, or who is right or who's wrong. We're not going to speak of that. We're speaking on another thing altogether. In so doing, the brothers were placed, and certain symbols or tokens, as you may call them, were placed on the individual. Men were given a certain designation and responsibility which they had. But something was more important than that also. Since the ancient Egyptians, as I'm using the term you know, had to be reminded, as they reminded themselves, from whence they came. Any organization they had to relate back to the central position that they came from, the beginning of the Nile. That is why one of the major papyrus still states, we came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells, at the foothills of the mountain of the moon. Let us dissect this. We came from the beginning of the Nile. There are many places at the beginning of the Nile. The furthest point south will be in Uganda, the White Nile. By the way, since there is no Lake Victoria, they may have one in England, but they don't have anyone in Africa. So we will go back to the original name, Mwanja Nwanza. And we will call it that because that's what the African name is. The fact that they came from England and name it what they want don't mean we have to follow it. When they're gone, we go back to what is ours. So, Mwanza, Nyanza. And they said from the beginning of the Nile, but there is another part of the beginning of the Nile. It starts in Ethiopia, Lake Tana, and it's called the Blue Nile. The Blue Nile and the White Nile flowing down north, not down south. We're not here. We are in Africa, and north is the lowland, south is the highland, and it flows down north and merge, both rivers merge at a place called Khartoum in Sudan. A third body of water out of the Ethiopian highland, called the Atbara River, flows down north and merges with the two bodies of water that had merged already and form just the plain Nile, which continues north into ancient Nubia, from there into ancient Egypt, through Egypt and empties in the Great Sea, now called the Mediterranean. So, in his description of where he came from, Ethiopians, Egyptians, Nubians, and others, he made that very clear. But in making that clear, in all of the stations they made, and speaking about certain very important traditions of the trilogy, it was necessary to make those stations very clear. Thus, when some of you talk about going to take bones out of the earth at a certain place across the fence in Ethiopia, you must remember that the three men of the three names were not from Ethiopia, but had gone to Ethiopia to evade the behavior as some wrongful brothers. When they went to Ethiopia, they did not go to Ethiopia with the Western title of 33 degrees symbolic of the life of Jesus. Now let's face it, where the 33 comes from. A circle is not made of 33 degrees. It is made of 360 degrees, and each quarter of the circle is 90. And you will have to go to Meroe to go to the second quarter. You see, at home we are not allowed to put an electric cord in the socket and then walk on the produce of that electric cord. We have to go to Meroe, place called Meroe. And heaven knows it's hell to get to Meroe. Because you're going there in a British Jeep, and there's no road. When you drive back 5 minutes, the track is gone, and you got to know I have to carry somebody who knows just where to go. Otherwise, you could be there driving around for a few days, or maybe forever. And you then go and you walk on the hot grass. And I'm saying hot grass to make you feel good, but there's no grass there. You're going to walk in the hot sun. And when you've walked enough, I've got elder men in here, when you've walked enough and are almost exhausted, then somebody sees one of the 44 pyramids in Sudan. Nobody tells us there's Sudan, right? When last did you hear there are pyramids in Sudan? Take my words, there are. I've been there a number of times, and I've needed the podiatrist when I return. But there is that hot sand in which you walk. There was no Solomon when they built the first pyramid. There was no Abraham, the first of the Hebrews. And I'm not saying that for joke. I was born in the Hebrew religion, and I let it go. Because you cannot tell me lies and expect me to continue to lie because I'm a member of the group. It is incumbent upon me to change the lie, if it's possible, or get rid of it completely. Because the integrity of the African person is that of the deity. I said before that it's going to be difficult to give this lecture. It is difficult because I am speaking to a house of my people. And I understand the significance of the words I used. So I need to document a little further. I am quite respectful of the men, the honorable men, the man whose body and soul went on, his ka and his ba, went on to the next world, who laid down his life for me and others like me, when he took upon himself a rights passed on from the British Crown to him who had come from Barbados to Philadelphia, and then dealt with others, included Washington, who I have no respect for. You see, when a man exchanged any member of my family for molasses, for their being slaves, how can I respect them? You don't know if a European having respect for Hitler. Now, how should I have respect for a man that treat me like Hitler treat people? Unless you don't have any respect for me yourself. So I don't have any respect, but I'm talking about a man that you pay honor, most reverent honor, in this institution. I'm speaking as this brother in context for what he meant for me and others. I have read carefully his background both in war and outside of war, and his relationship in the United States of America, or what turned out to be the United States of America. Thus, I understand that man. I understand that he was trying to do the best. It put me in the mind of when the brother from the Virgin Islands came here, Dr. Blyden, Dr. Edward Widmott Blyden. When Dr. Blyden came here to Atlanta, ATC, the religious institution there, you should read what Dr. Blyden said, and you would vomit. You would get sick. But you have to remember that Dr. Blyden had just come here from the United States, what was the Danish Virgin Islands, which later became the United States Virgin Islands, and he was repeating what he had been taught without any other experience. You read the same Dr. Blyden's work a number of years later when he had stopped being the president of the College of Liberia, and you see two different people completely. In the first case, you are seeing a little slave with a slave mind. In the second case, you are seeing the slave who had dropped his slavishness, become an African man, and spoke as an African man. It is Blyden is the one who had given us the term, what does the European have that the African woman have to take as a model for her beauty? The question, of course, was answered itself, and the answer was nothing. Back to the Masonic principle. It is in this context, then, that Imhotep laid down the value of the Masonic principles. Masonic principles. And the first principle he dealt with is the concept of the one and only deity. We talk about the one and only deity in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, And there still is no one and only deity. We said the God above all other gods. For I am a jealous God. Akhenaten said, there is only one God, and his name is Aten. One said there's only one God. The other one said, I am above all the others. Judaism, Christianity, if I'm wrong, correct me. But we can't deal with it because it hasn't been endorsed by our European masters yet. Probably it will never be too late. Someday we will all recognize a God, because if I brought a picture of God here and try to put him in this hall, I may not be lucky, because he may not be the right color, based upon some that I've seen. But when Imhotep decided to inaugurate the first lodge, L-O-D-G-E, he made a distinction between the church or the synagogue, or call it what, the house of worship. That would be the best thing to call it, so there'd be no difficulty. He made the distinction between that and the lodge. And when he induct what they call the village lodge, the city lodge, the lower lodge, not the one attached to the pyramid, because that one was for the operation of the human body, to remove the intestines and other aspects, including the heart, soul, and to put them in the canopic jars. The placing of those things in the canopic jars was part of the Masonic order, part of the work in which a Mason had to perform. I ask you, gentlemen, do you perform this work? No. We don't any longer, because England, the English House and the Charter House said that we were not interested in the actual act. Up until the death of Selassie, to be a member of the Ethiopian inner house, those who were in the inner house had to perform this act, as well as their ladies here, so as well as certain other things. I know you would bear with me understanding the circumstances under which I have to speak. But anyhow, those traditions in which were being established at that particular time were held and carried on. Different stations or different applications were used, and in them they then adjusted this book. What I have before me here is an original copy of the Book of the Dead and the Papyrus of Annie. You may have heard of it. You heard your Bible speak of the last book of the Bible. And you say, I brought it. It isn't, where it is, where it isn't, and it's in 3 languages. It's in Medo-Nesha, it's in Greek, and it's in English. So if you have any doubt in either one, you can check it out. And I am not able to carry it a block. I'm not that young anymore. But I brought it for you to look into it and to see certain things that you will recognize. A lot of things in there you would recognize. That is like when I went to a mosque one day and to a synagogue and so forth, the sister was testifying. And I was in suspense. A woman testifying? Where did she get a testis to testify? To testify was the duty of a man, that should he tell not the truth, he would be demanded. But then I realized that everything has become symbolic. in the West. What we are doing is symbolism. Anybody knows. People aren't even afraid anymore to come to you on the end of a what, or come drawn, or anything like that. Because they already know nobody's going to be hurt. They will go and lay in the coffin next to you. Because, as a matter of fact, nobody goes in the coffin with anybody these days. And it is said, it's read, but it's never carried out. Everything is symbolic. We have nothing, thank you, sir, that we use in realism. The words then, why is it that Solomon has been given the dubious responsibility of carrying this on his head 1,000 and odd years later, when this were already in its full strength? Because around Solomon, they could build, the most logical person for them to have carried the torch over and transfer it to Israel. But if you read the Ethiopian account of Makeda, the queen of Sheba, visit to Solomon, then you would understand that it could not have been, since in fact she went to Israel when Ethiopia was the strongest nation in the world. And she went with a delegation, gave him her body, and took what the little did have, took that away, plus a promise that when her son Makeda came older, Makeda's son come older, Abna Hakim the first, which you call Melanik the first, his name is Abna Hakim, that he will return to Israel, receive the ring, the golden ring, and return back to Ethiopia, and then he would return with the golden whatever. Now that is a mystery, because it isn't in Ethiopia and it isn't nowhere, but we know what is called in Egypt the golden box for the confined one. See, when we take religion and use religion as an aggressor one to the other, we are bound to get the cut off, because then we don't speak to each other, we don't share with each other, and therefore information breaks off and we could pass anything. And that is what has happened to us during this period of time. So the queen of Sheba returning with Yakba. When Yakba brought back the brothers with him, well, now they call us Falasha, but we call ourselves Beta Israel. When they brought back the fellows with them, and the Ethiopian chronicles of the kings, the Kebra Nagats, when the Kebra Nagats was adjusted to suit of recent time, then you could see what all that all stood for. From then on, it was necessary to use the European system of passing identification by paper, by templates, by different things to say what one is. From then, it was necessary to remove the heavy requirement from 7 degrees before you can go out and call yourself a man at 3 degrees. You had to come in at 7. I think the 3-letter men still do that. The odd fellows still use the 7 degrees. From then, you stop burying as you were born as a baby in the crouch position. Then you were buried straight out. From then, you did not do such things as we were talking about. The pass through the window, it was not necessary to do when the brother passed away. He was not compelled to pass him through the window, and these different kind acts of things. I think it was Churchward, Dr. Churchward, FPRS, in England, who wrote 8 different books on Freemasonry. And he placed down the different kinds of things that were changed to suit this kind of work. As you know that Churchward asked for acceptance in the lodge in Nubia and was turned down. They was told that outside of the African people, there weren't no way in which they could give him that kind of honor. Thank heavens they still maintain it. You see, when one looks at this, look what has happened. Remember that this remains strong. It remained the defender of certain things until the Roman Catholic wanted to thrust its muscle in Spain. And during the period of Inquisition, the Masons found themselves in a lot of difficulties with the Roman Church. Out of that, the superintendent of the order, as you know, the Jesuits are not members of the Roman Catholic Church. The Jesuits are members of the fighting arm that protects the church. The superintendent is the head of the Jesuits. And he had lived for many, many years in Spain until 25 years ago when he was carried to Rome to live, but not under, but in conjunction with the Roman Church. And at that time, the Jesuits started, but again, we must go back to the history. Here we are again. Molina, Louis Molina. Louis Monera, a man whose parents went to Spain from Mauritania, an African carrying the name of a Moor, was one of the strongest Jesuits, one of the first of the three that formed the Jesuit order. And he moved first against the Protestant and others. There were a number of other Jesuits, of course, from Mauritania and other places, but I needed to bring them up in your memory. The using of the seventh degree to bring a man into the entry, and that's as much as I can say about that right now, had not been carried away until much later. Of course, the three-letter men pick it up. That's the three circles. And they instituted it, whereas symbolically, many of us still maintain the three things. What becomes difficulty, however, is how does ourselves, as African brothers and sisters, communicate with each other in letters which we could understand, that the letters itself become ambiguous in that some is a 4 letter, some is a 3 letter, some is whatever the letters. And we are able to sit down continuously speaking with our former master's children, asking to find a way in which we can work, but we don't sit down with our own. Now you explain it to me. Explain it that I can sit down with any European group and talk peace, talk in merger, but I can't sit down with one person looking like me and speak merger. Why? Years and years of induction as a slave. That mentality continues. And that means the world over, including at home in the motherland. Something must be wrong. Until that day when we can speak to each other. Like I told a man, he said to me, "What are you?" I said, "A man." He said, "No, what kind of a man?" I said, "A straight man." Because these days you can't tell a man from a woman. And they told me it's a matter of preference of sex. And I said, no, my sex don't go that bad, that it's a matter of, but